Ever wondered what daily life actually feels like for Amish women raising large families without modern conveniences? The reality defies simple narratives, neither the romantic ideal of peaceful domestic bliss nor the stereotype of pure oppression. These 10 aspects reveal the complex, exhausting, and surprisingly varied reality behind the modest dress. Pre-dawn morning routine. The day begins at 4:30 a.m. year-round when Amish mothers rise in darkness to light wood stoves, prepare breakfast for families of 8 to 10, and organize the household before children wake and the day's demands multiply beyond manageability. The cold morning air bites as the woman moves through the dark house toward the kitchen where yesterday's fire had died completely overnight. Kindling must be arranged, matches struck, and flames coaxed until the stove begins radiating warmth that will take an hour to heat the room adequately. While the stove heats, she begins breakfast preparation, mixing biscuit dough by hand, frying eggs and bacon, setting the table for the family that will gather within the hour. Children's lunches require packing sandwiches made from yesterday's bread, fruit from the cellar, cookies from last week's baking. School clothing must be laid out, homework checked, and a dozen small morning tasks completed before 6 a.m. when children begin waking and the chaos of getting 8 people fed, dressed, and ready for the day begins in earnest. By 7 a.m., when her husband and older children leave for work and school, she has already been awake for 2.5 hours, completing labor that will be repeated tomorrow and every day after without variation or rest. The exhaustion is not occasional, it is the permanent baseline state of existence, physical labor reality. The romantic image of Amish women peacefully tending homes conceals brutal physical labor that would exhaust most modern women within days. Manual washing for large families, hand-wringing heavy wet laundry, hauling water and wood, scrubbing floors on hands and knees, and performing tasks that commercial gyms simulate for exercise but that Amish women do from necessity until their bodies break down. Monday washing day requires managing hundreds of pounds of wet laundry through manual or gas-powered wringer washers, feeding each piece through rollers, lifting soaked sheets and clothing, and hanging everything to dry regardless of weather. The work continues for 6 to 8 hours, leaving hands raw from lye soap and backs aching from constant bending. Women in their 40s often develop chronic back problems, joint pain, and repetitive stress injuries that would qualify as workplace injuries if they occurred in commercial settings. Water hauling, whether from outdoor pumps to kitchen sinks or from wells to laundry areas, builds arm and shoulder strength but also creates muscle strain and fatigue. Wood must be carried from sheds to stoves multiple times daily to maintain cooking and heating fires. Floors are scrubbed by hand on hands and knees because no vacuum cleaners or electric mops exist. Garden work during growing season adds hours of hoeing, weeding, and harvesting in summer heat without air conditioning or modern tools minimizing effort. The physical toll appears in bodies aged beyond their years, women of 35 looking 50, hands gnarled from constant work, posture stooped from decades of manual labor, and chronic pain accepted as inevitable rather than treatable. Childbearing expectations. Amish women average 6 to 8 children, with pregnancies beginning in early 20s and continuing through late 30s, a reproductive pattern that places enormous physical demands on bodies already exhausted from household labor while offering little recovery time between pregnancies or support for the cumulative toll. The expectation of large families is culturally and theologically reinforced. Children are viewed as blessings from God that faithful couples receive without human intervention to prevent conception. Birth control is forbidden or heavily discouraged in most communities, making family size largely unplanned beyond natural spacing from breastfeeding. Women who struggle with pregnancy complications or who express desire for fewer children face community pressure to accept God's will and trust in His provision rather than making reproductive choices based on their own health or preferences. Home births with midwife assistance represent the norm, avoiding hospital costs but also hospital interventions when complications arise. Most births proceed safely, but the risk is real. Maternal and infant mortality rates in Amish communities exceed those in mainstream populations that utilize hospital births and prenatal care routinely. Women accept this risk as part of natural childbearing, though some privately wish for the medical safety their English neighbors access. Recovery time is minimal. Women typically resume household work within days of delivery, nursing infants, while cooking, cleaning, and managing older children. The idea of maternity leave or postpartum rest doesn't exist when there are no alternative caregivers and household work cannot stop because a mother has just given birth. By their 40s, many Amish women's bodies show the cumulative damage pelvic floor disorders from repeated childbearing, chronic fatigue, premature aging, and health problems that develop during pregnancies but were never adequately treated. The cost of large families is written in their bodies. The marriage dynamics. Amish marriage operates on a clearly defined hierarchy rooted in biblical interpretation. Husbands serve as head of household with final authority over major decisions, while wives are expected to submit to this leadership, creating power dynamics that shape every aspect of women's lives and limit their autonomy in ways many modern observers find troubling. The theology is explicit and regularly reinforced through preaching and community expectations. Ephesians 5:22-24, commanding wives to submit to husbands as the church submits to Christ, is taken literally, creating religious justification for male authority that women are taught to accept as God's design rather than human social construction. Questioning this arrangement means questioning God's word and inviting community disapproval for rebellious spirit. Financial control rests with husbands in most families. Women typically lack separate bank accounts, independent income, or control over household finances beyond day-to-day grocery money. Major purchases, land decisions, or financial planning happen through husbands' judgment, with wives providing input that husbands may or may not consider. This economic dependence becomes acute in abusive marriages, where women literally have no money of their own to facilitate escape. Leaving abusive marriages is practically impossible. Divorce is forbidden except in cases of adultery, and even then it is heavily discouraged. Women in abusive situations face limited options, endure the abuse, seek church intervention that usually results in counseling for both parties and prayers for healing, or leave the community entirely through shunning that means losing children, family, and everything familiar. Some women do find genuine partnership within these structures. Husbands who consult wives respectfully, who share decision-making despite theological hierarchy, and who treat wives as valued partners rather than subordinates. But the system itself creates vulnerability, and women's happiness depends entirely on whether they marry men who choose to use their authority gently, rather than having inherent rights protecting them from potential abuse of that authority. Education limitation impact. Amish girls' education ends at 8th grade, creating lifelong limitations affecting literacy, critical thinking, career options, and autonomy in ways that particularly disadvantage women who might otherwise develop skills, providing independence from male relatives or community structures. The 8th grade stopping point means most Amish women read at perhaps 6th or 7th grade level, adequate for simple texts, but struggling with complex materials, legal documents, medical information, or technical writing. Math skills end at basic arithmetic, making financial management, measurement conversions, or statistical reasoning difficult. Science education stops before biology, chemistry, or physics that might help understand health conditions or make informed medical decisions. History and geography knowledge remains elementary, limiting understanding of broader world contexts. This educational limitation creates dependence. Women cannot easily research medical conditions online, cannot read and understand legal contracts without help, cannot navigate insurance or government forms independently, and cannot pursue careers requiring credentials or specialized knowledge. They must rely on husbands, fathers, or community experts for tasks that moderately educated women handle independently. The intellectual frustration affects bright women aware that their curiosity and potential go undeveloped. Some secretly read whatever materials they can access, teaching themselves beyond official schooling limits. But most lack both access to materials and time for self-education, given household demands. Smart women find themselves trapped by systemic barriers, not inherent inability, but deliberate educational restriction that maintains traditional structures by preventing women from developing skills and knowledge that might enable independence. The cost is measured in unrealized potential, suppressed curiosity, and lifelong dependence on others for tasks they could have learned to handle themselves with adequate education. Social restrictions. Amish women's movements and social interactions face supervision and restriction that effectively limit freedom in ways that would seem intolerable to most modern American women, but that Amish culture presents as natural protection rather than control. Travel away from home typically requires a husband's knowledge and often his accompaniment. Women don't take independent trips to visit relatives or friends without coordinating with husbands who control buggy use and must approve absences from household duties. This practical control over transportation becomes control over social connections and independence, since women cannot simply leave when they want but must negotiate permission each time. Friendships outside the community are discouraged or forbidden. The separation principle that limits Amish contact with the English world means women cannot develop close relationships with non-Amish women who might expose them to alternative perspectives or support networks outside community. Control. Female friendships exist within the Amish community but under surveillance, since gossip travels quickly and behavior is monitored. Dress codes are rigidly enforced through community pressure and shame rather than formal punishment. Women who deviate from approved styles, skirts a bit shorter, colors slightly brighter, head coverings worn differently, face immediate social correction through whispered comments, direct confrontation, or ministerial visits reminding them of proper humility. The constant surveillance of appearance creates psychological pressure toward conformity that most women internalize so thoroughly that they cannot imagine dressing differently even when alone. Speaking is contextual appropriate in women's gatherings, limited in mixed-gender community settings, and often silent in church, except for singing. Women learn when their voices are welcome and when silence is expected. Domestic violence reality. Behind the peaceful family image that attracts admirers of Amish life exists a hidden reality of domestic abuse, occurring at rates that community privacy prevents accurate assessment, but that advocates working with former Amish women report as disturbingly common and inadequately addressed. Physical abuse happens in Amish homes as it does everywhere, but victims face unique barriers to help. Calling police brings shame on families and risks shunning for involving worldly authorities in private matters. Women cannot easily leave since they lack education, job skills, independent income, or places to go with multiple children. Shelters require navigating English world systems that Amish women are unprepared for, and leaving means abandoning not just husband, but entire community. Church discipline for abusive husbands typically involves counseling, prayer, and instructions to treat wives better, but no enforcement mechanisms exist beyond shunning a punishment so severe for family disruption that it's rarely imposed for domestic violence, that church leaders often view as private family matter rather than community level. Offense requiring drastic response. The theology of wifely submission and marriage permanence creates framework where abused women are counseled to forgive, to examine their own behavior for provocations, and to trust that patience and prayer will change husbands. Some are explicitly told that leaving an abusive husband demonstrates lack of faith in God's power to redeem the situation, placing spiritual pressure on top of practical barriers to escape. The healthcare limitations. Amish women's healthcare access reflects both economic constraints and cultural priorities that consistently place women's health needs last after children, husband, and livestock, creating patterns of delayed treatment, untreated conditions, and acceptance of pain and illness as inevitable rather than addressable. Medical care for women themselves is delayed for cost reasons. That persistent pain, those troubling symptoms, that increasing fatigue, all are endured until they become crisis. Because seeking medical help means spending limited family resources on the mother rather than children who might need care. Women in their 30s with obvious health problems postpone doctor's visits for months or years, trying home remedies and hoping problems resolve themselves because they cannot justify the expense of caring for themselves. Reproductive health is particularly neglected. Postpartum complications often go untreated. Pelvic floor disorders resulting from multiple childbirths are endured without physical therapy or surgical correction. Painful menstruation